Hello, project people, and it gives me great pleasure to be here at EVA29. We tried to do a special live broadcast on LinkedIn Live for the first time, but technology failed us and maybe that's apt because we are talking about people and data at EVA29. But it's great to collaborate with the RPM, Responsible Project Management, of which both myself and Steve Wake are ambassadors. And I am sitting here with Dr. Karen Thompson as well. So thank you very much for being here. And wanted to do a bit of a newscast, or RPM cast, as you're calling it. I know you've got a whole host of questions and discussion points you want to talk to Steve about, and myself. But I think we kind of landed on, this whole conference is about data and people, and whose job is it really to upskill and educate those around what's happening in the data space. Also focusing on people and leadership and behaviors as well. So I don't know where you wanted to take us.
Indeed. Thank you very much indeed for that introduction. Dale, delighted to be here with two RPM ambassadors. And for those that don't know me, I'm one of the co-founders of Responsible Project Management. I guess we've heard some very interesting speakers this morning. I think some of the things that stand out to me, I very much picked up on what I would call the myopia of project management that has been there for as long as I've been in project management, which is this focus on sort of the end of the project and on cost, or alongside time and quality, of course, but very much those sort of that myopic view of the project, as though at the end of it, somehow we all walk away and do different things, which of course we do as project managers, but the results and the transformations that project has brought about, of course, are only just starting at that point. So, but I do see some green shoots. There were some very exciting mentions, I thought. We had Suresh, who was talking about extending the scope of project management to include thinking about the environmental and social. He was talking about the data specifically. It was sort of the last thing on his list. So I suppose in terms of education and skills, I suppose one of the questions I've still got really is how do we bring that to the forefront? How do we actually raise the profile of the other dimensions? Because every project has an economic dimension that we're all very familiar with, but that social and environmental dimension, one can't help feeling in this sort of day and age when these are the problems that so many of us are facing day to day, and indeed in London here, of course, although London is in a flood basin, we are at the moment at least not suffering some of the effects as much as many other parts of the world. But every project has those dimensions. So actually this focus on cost, it just feels to me like we're fiddling with stuff and we need to get our head out and look beyond the end of the project. And there were other green shoots because Val, of course, was talking about this idea of not just sort of throwing the project over the fence at the end and sort of walking away. But actually, we've not yet really looked at the sort of metrics and the data that's needed to support that and how we sort of break that. It's almost like the equivalent of the glass ceiling, isn't it? At the end of the project, we have this glass wall and we just sort of walk away. How do we break through that and actually make the connections? So, Steve, any thoughts on those pretty important central issues?
How do we break through the glass ceiling, Steve?
Well, there are lots and lots of people, particularly if you follow LinkedIn, which I must confess I try to do as little as possible. And even though I try not to, I get drawn into and catch sight of what's going on. And it's all talk for the most part, what I see on LinkedIn. Similarly, your problem potentially, Karen, is that everybody agrees with you until they're told to drive at 20 miles an hour, or that they've got a diesel car, or there's something that actually directly affects them. And they don't half like it, again, when our politicians then let them off the hook and say, well, we'll open up another oil field, all of those sorts of things. And so I have been preoccupied with the thought that many of the discussion fora and the champions, the virtue signalers, the grandstanders on LinkedIn, it's not in their interest, rather like with the big six consultancies, not to solve the problem. They want that scab to stay unhealed. They want that itch to be constantly scratched so that they can keep on feeding in or what's the word, being fire starters all the time. So there's lots of fire starting, and very little focus on outcomes and convincing people to change. The things that I can do, firstly, is bring together people to have discussions, as we are having here. I would suggest that the new BS 202001 project controls, finally due out back end of this year, early next year, the specification standard for project controls will give that checklist that can be written into specification, into contract, into training programs, whatever you, assessment and assurance. And within there, we have neatly tucked, because Karen's been doing it, all sorts of statements and requirements about sustainable practice and some of the things relating to carbon zero and those sorts of things. So you have to make people do it somehow. You either legislate for it or you put it into their day-to-day practice. So that's the main objective. And similarly, as I mentioned this morning, the hoo-ha about data analytics would be far better resolved, I believe, by saying or admitting that earned value management, or an incarnation of the framework of earned value management, yields as much data to be analysed as I can actually imagine. And if the community really wanted to put its heft somewhere, then support the implementation and the use of earned value, because if you did that, firstly, you'd have all the data you needed to analyse. It does do forecasting ahead from historical forecasting. It also is an acknowledged framework nationally and internationally in some of the largest projects, the major projects in the world. Surely, even if that only got 80% of what the data analytics crowd want to do, then that focus of attention would begin to provide that, and I think would find an awful lot of support in those bodies that we want to impress, like the audit office, like the government spending departments, and the taxpayer. And you get a lot of support from industry as well. The only other thing, and then I will shut up, because I know I'm notorious for not, is I'm focusing on the introduction of a GCSE in project management, which combines problem-solving skills as well as the techniques and tools for project managers. Why? Because if we did that there, rather than leave it to the professional bodies, then 120,000 school children would come out of school at the age of 16 with a set of technical and behavioural problem-solving skills, which are also employability skills. And if there's not a better example of genuine levelling up, I don't know what is. And it would be enforced right the way throughout the country.
Indeed, thank you.
So that's how you do it. You give it a purpose.
Absolutely.
And you focus attention on something that everybody gets. Everybody gets what a GCSE is. Everybody gets what an earned value project management system is, because it's enshrined in standards.
Do we know what proportion of projects today use earned value? I mean, I love it. I've been teaching it for 25 years.
I don't. I just know that all the big ones do.
Indeed. Do you use earned value?
So again, me personally, no, because I'm a consultant, but different clients will use earned value in varying degrees of maturity. There are certain ones that use as a box-ticking exercise to say we do it because it's contractually obliged. But there's others where they actively use it to make decisions and inform themselves of real-time project delivery. Now, yes, there's a lot of debate we've had around can the likes of earned value coexist with an NEC and different baselines. Yes, the short answer is yes. But you need people to appreciate and understand the nuances, the differences of what information different points of reference give you. And this comes back to the data and the people and the upskilling. And you bring in a great point there, Steve, about the GCSE. And that's action. That's actively driving it. You're not just talking about it, which is fantastic. But I think there's probably two distinct groups, if you will. There's those in sort of early years, tertiary education, school year, that we need to educate, but there's those that are currently working that still need to upskill and still need to be trained and educated. And then how do we go about in necessarily training those that are in practice?
Well, if I may just interject very briefly, not only did I presented the idea that we do a GCSE, which could morph into something very similar, this new British standard qualification that's going to come out that's replacing A levels and T levels, but it would still be based around the theory that would be within the GCSE. And last but not least, I have also floated that we would create what I am calling currently an all level. The all level is basically the GCSE, but not given on the national curriculum, but available for use right anywhere by any organisation, in an apprenticeship, in a university course, vocational training within a training body could offer it as well. And that again, not only am I cracking the sort of foundational slab of the youth building year on year, and remember it's year after year we'll be beginning to introduce this skill set, but we could go further up the pike, lifelong learning, and say you could also do this as part of your apprenticeship.
Absolutely.
Indeed, yeah, and I'm really excited about that initiative, Steve. As you're aware, I think the idea of taking, especially using that as a device to introduce problem-solving skills for young people is very, very relevant. One of the things I noticed this year when I went up to Cumbria to talk at their quite a large conference that had an awful lot of apprentices in the audience from a whole range of different types of projects, ranging from the nuclear, building the nuclear submarines, through to the BBC and media type programmes, was how much the younger generation are so on board already and almost expect this. I think this is coming down the tracks and going to be a real wake-up call for traditional education, for traditional training, and they really want the tools and techniques, but also then to be heard. And I noticed earlier you mentioned the idea of the policymakers. One of my concerns, I suppose, is the tendency, shall we say, of certain influential bodies to push this down to the level of the consumer or the level of the individual. And actually, I think in order to get the sort of change that we need, it's going to require a lot more of that. So years ago, I was never in favour of legislation and regulation. I actually think we're probably in a situation now where we are going to need a great deal of that. So I guess the other challenge for us all is how do we get the policymakers on board?
Again, I was told unless you get organisations behind you, and this was somebody from the audit office years ago, you'll never get a politician to support it. So what you have to do is take to the policymakers, the politicians, the fact that look at all this, look at all these people, look at this body of interest, and opportunists that they are, they jump onto that. That's a bandwagon that's well worth supporting. And I think that what we've worked at, what I've worked at, particularly in the last few years, is creating that army of interest. And also making sure that it's win-win. There are several win-wins in a GCSE. Imagine what parent doesn't want his kid to go out, a child, sorry, not supposed to say kid anymore. What parent doesn't want to, won't take comfort from the fact that the qualification that's being learnt is a close match to getting a job, employability skills. What could be better than that in terms of, taking care of the future or thinking towards the future, and in fact making parents and children think better of the education system as well.
Karen, where do organisations, businesses fall? What accountability, responsibility, duty of care do they have to upskill their workforces when it comes to data and people? Because one thing is understanding data, how that works. You have everything from data engineers to data scientists, data analysts, but then it's knowing what to do with that, and then all the behavioural elements around that of communicating, storytelling, decision making, those elements as well. And I feel like organizations play a big, or have a responsibility to also play their part in upskilling and educating their workforce.
I think we've heard a lot of things this morning that point to that. Maybe not again in the foreground yet, but we've been talking about data and people, and there was a mention of responsibility for the data, but of course the other part of this is what you do with that data. I mean, my first career was in database, and we were talking about, we can create the best databases in the world, but it's all about who's going to make decisions, and where are those decisions going to be made around the use of that data. And the other sort of green shoot I have seen, perhaps, it's about having much more collaborative decision making, creating an environment where people feel secure to, and how we capture those lessons being learnt and share those and actually listen to them. I think that's the organisational piece. This isn't about something that organisations do to their workforce. I think it's about creating a climate where people can respond to their actual values and beliefs and don't necessarily feel when they come into the workplace they have to suppress all of that. Now, I know one of the decisions we've sort of talked about recently, we tend to, in project management circles, talk about not wanting to get involved in the politics. And this is all political, but we can't keep dodging that one because projects create the future.
If I may sort of conclude, one of my major objectives is to get rid of the master, mistress, servant relationship.
Yeah.
I don't want people to be totally wedded to AI software that gives them answers without having a human presiding over that. And I want to get away from people waiting to be told what to do in our community, often by people who haven't got a clue what we do or what they need to tell us, really. And so, but are still kind of forced into, well, I'm a senior civil servant customer. I'll make it up as I go along. And I want to get away from that.
Yeah.
And if I can just say, this morning we had that illustrated in 2 brilliant case studies, which I certainly wasn't expecting. The building of the new nuclear submarine and how collaborative that was, and how their approach was actually not just doing things that are beneficial for people and the planet and so forth, but actually bringing together to drive out risk and to actually handle that much better. Because as we all know, it's not the stuff we know that causes the problems on the projects, it's the stuff we don't know. And that's where the focus on risk management comes in, but we need to avoid making that too mechanistic. And we heard some great examples. And a much smaller project that is exactly the same.
An enabling dialogue.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think you've nailed it.
Yeah, spot on. Look, we wanted to give folks a brief bite size, I guess, of what's happening at EVA and the types of discussions we're having here, which is fantastic. And as you say, it's not just talk, there's actions happening. Yeah. They're having lunch as we talk, and I guarantee you there's some plans being formulated by various people. And I'm looking forward to the second half of today. Steve, a final word from you just for EVA29?
Well, the arc was to go from the big ideas down to who's really going to help sort these things out. It's the people, either as individuals or within teams or within the office, which again has been highlighted by Dreadnought this morning in particular. But we're really going to get down to that bringing together of the human problem solving this afternoon. So you've got this narrative arc of, again, trying to provide an introduction to the concept and then giving some practical solutions as to how you might take that back to work. And final advert, EVA 30, April the 18th. If you want to present, get in touch. And if you want to come along, I won't stop.
There you have it. You've got the dates. Get it in your diary. Get in touch with Steve. It's always an amazing event to come along to. It's such a privilege to be here. Next time, we'll hopefully get the live stream going, but hopefully enjoy this recording. It's bye from us at the Armourers Hall in London.
Thank you very much to both of you for giving up your time and for facilitating the whole event and for trying to facilitate this session. Great to get it recorded. Thank you very much indeed.
Absolutely. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.